9 terrifying true driving at night stories from Appalachian small towns. Horror Stories Story 1. Headlights in the rear view. I'd been driving that back road through Lark Hollow longer than I cared to admit, long enough to know the way each bend felt before I reached it, long enough to feel the difference in the air when the hollow was settling into night. That evening, the air was damp, carrying that heavy scent of pine and the faint bite of creek water. My headlights cut a tunnel through the dark, the gravel shoulder fading into trees that leaned in too close, their bare winter branches like black ribs reaching over the road. The asphalt here was patched in places, cracked in others, the kind of road that swallows sound. So all I heard was the hum of my tires and the occasional click of cooling metal when I let off the gas. Then I saw the first flicker of light in the mirror. Just 2 pinpoints at first, far back, catching the curves when I did. My first thought was some local heading home from the mill, maybe lingering back because they didn't feel like dealing with my slower pace. But after a mile, they were still there, neither gaining nor falling behind, always the same distance, too close to be coincidence, too far to pass. The way the road winds, you can usually shake a tail without trying. You slow a little on the steeper bends, speed up on the straights, and anyone behind you either drifts away or catches up. This one matched me exactly. I tapped my brakes a couple times, a habit from old driving lessons. See if they mirror you. They did. Perfect timing. No horn, no flash of high beams, no sign they even noticed me looking. The further I drove, the more the night seemed to close in. Houses had thinned out miles back, replaced by nothing but trees and the occasional drainage ditch glinting in the headlights. The moon was a thin slice overhead, throwing just enough light to make the tree line look like a jagged black wall. Every so often I'd pass one of those reflective mile markers, the kind that flashes quick in your headlights, and each time it was like a heartbeat, counting the distance between me and whatever was back there. I kept thinking I'd see some detail if I stared long enough, maybe a grill shape, maybe the outline of a driver's face in the glow. But the lights stayed too bright, washing out everything else. A half hour in, my hands had started to sweat against the wheel. I told myself to pull over, let them pass, but there's something about being followed on a road that is empty that makes you hesitate. The idea of stepping out into that dark with only tree shadows on either side made my chest feel tight. I kept driving, knowing exactly how long it was until the old wooden bridge came up. Everyone in the county knows that bridge. It's a single-lane thing with warped boards you can hear rattling under your tires. The creek beneath runs shallow most of the year, but in winter it's loud, pushing ice chunks through like slow glass. I figured maybe once I crossed, the road would straighten and they'd pass, finally letting me see their face. As I rolled onto the bridge, the headlights still glared behind me. Halfway across, I glanced in the mirror, and they were gone. Not dimming, not turning off, just gone. I pressed the brake without thinking, the boards groaning under me, and let the car roll to a stop just past the other end. My heart was in my ears, but the world around me was dead quiet, except for the water under the bridge. I shifted into park, sat there a second, and then opened the door. The air hit me cold, wet with the smell of pine needles and that clean mineral scent creeks get in the cold months. My own headlights threw long shapes across the brush, making the shadows look like something moving until I stared too long and they held still. I stepped to the back of my car, scanning up the road. There's nowhere to turn around for a mile back, and no pull-offs except for a narrow ditch trail that's been blocked for years. I walked a little onto the bridge, my boots clunking on the boards, leaning over the rail to see the water catch faint moonlight. Nothing. No tail lights in the distance, no rumble of another engine fading out. Just me, my car, and the sound of running water. I don't know why I lingered. Maybe I thought I'd catch some trace, footprints, tire tracks, something to explain it. All I found was a small patch of wet gravel just past the bridge, like a car had stopped there briefly. It was too dark to tell if there were fresh tire impressions, and the more I stared, the less sure I was that the patch hadn't been there before. I stood there long enough for the cold to work its way under my jacket, that sharp kind of cold that starts to feel like it's pressing you to leave. I finally climbed back in the car, locking the doors without even thinking about it, and started toward home. The rest of the drive felt heavier somehow, like the trees had shifted closer to the road when I wasn't looking. My mirrors stayed empty, but I kept checking them every few seconds anyway, bracing for the sudden flare of headlights that never came. When I reached the first real stretch of houses again, I almost pulled into a stranger's driveway just to feel like I wasn't alone out there. I didn't. I went home, parked under my porch light, and sat in the car with the engine running until the heat made my face hot. I told myself it was nothing, bad timing, tricks of the dark. But for weeks after, any time I drove that road, I'd find my eyes flicking to the mirror, half expecting those lights to be there again. They never were, but I started noticing other things instead. Small shifts in the air, like it got colder near that bridge even on warmer nights. Or the way sound seemed to drop out when I approached. The last time I went that way, I slowed before the bridge without realizing it, and just before I crossed, I caught a flicker in the mirror. Not 2 headlights this time, just one, far back, but keeping perfect pace. I drove faster. I didn't look back again until I was home, and I haven't driven through Lark Hollow since. Story 2. The Man by the Gas Pump. I'd been on the road for over an hour that night, heading toward the state line on one of those stretches of highway that feels too quiet for its own good. There weren't any towns for miles, just 2 lanes of blacktop fading into the tree line, and the occasional reflector catching my headlights like weak fireflies. I knew once I crossed into the next state there'd be nothing open until morning, so when I saw the glow of a gas station canopy in the distance, I decided to top off the tank. It was just past midnight when I pulled in. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, throwing a flat, pale glow across the lot. Only one other vehicle sat there, a rusted green pickup at the diesel pump, hood propped up. The paint was so faded it looked almost chalky, and the metal rippled in spots like it had been hammered back into shape after a wreck. I didn't see anyone around, so I eased up to the far pump, swiped my card, and started filling. The air smelled of gasoline, faintly mixed with that sweet, metallic scent of old antifreeze. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement. A man stood by the diesel pump, facing away, shoulders hunched, hands buried in the pockets of a dark coat. The light didn't hit his face, just the pale back of his head. I figured he was the truck's owner, so I called over a quick, "Evening." He didn't respond. I asked if he was okay, but he stayed still, like he hadn't heard me at all. The pump clicked off, startling me as I turned to put the nozzle back. I heard it, boots crunching on gravel right behind me, heavy, deliberate steps, close enough that I could feel my chest tighten. I spun around fast. No one was there. The lot was empty except for my car and that green truck. I looked back toward the diesel pump, and the man was gone. The hood of the truck was now closed, and I could hear the faint tick of a recently shut-off engine. I scanned the station, half expecting him to be heading toward the little glass booth, but it was dark. Locked up tight, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of damp pine from somewhere far off. Every part of me wanted to leave, so I got in my car, locked the doors, and pulled out. As I drove away, I glanced in the mirror. The truck sat silent under the canopy lights, its windshield black. 5 miles down the road, I noticed headlights behind me. They stayed far back, steady, never gaining or dropping away. They followed me for another 10 miles, past the state line, past the first exit, until I finally took my own. As my car curved down the ramp, I looked once more, and the lights were gone. No turn-off, no change in speed, just gone. When I reached my sister's house, my headlights swept across the gravel driveway and I froze. In the beam of light were two damp footprints, the shape of worn work boots, leading halfway up the drive before stopping in the middle of nothing. I never saw the green truck again, but every time I passed that station from the highway, I could swear I still saw it there under the lights, hood up, waiting. Story 3, The White Shape on Route 19. It was close to midnight when I left my cousin's wedding. The reception had gone late, and most of the family had already gone home hours earlier, but I'd lingered, talking with a few people I rarely saw. By the time I finally stepped outside, the air had that cool, empty feeling that comes when the hills have gone completely still. I didn't feel like taking the longer way through town, so I pointed the car toward Route 19, a stretch I knew well, but avoided at night when I could. It wasn't that it was dangerous in the usual sense. It was just empty. Long, dark miles without houses, gas stations, or even much shoulder to pull onto. The kind of road where the blacktop swallows the glow from your headlights, leaving you feeling like you're cutting through a hollow that's closed to the rest of the world. The first half hour was uneventful. My radio had lost reception before I'd even hit the first set of curves, so the only sound was the low hum of the engine and the faint hiss of the tires on pavement. The night sky was mostly clear, and a weak sliver of moonlight cut through the tree line every now and then. I kept the windows up, watching the road unwind ahead. Somewhere just past the halfway point, I caught sight of something pale in the distance. At first, I thought it was a deer lying in the road. They get hit often on this stretch, and it wasn't unusual to find one sprawled in the lane. I eased off the gas and kept my hands steady on the wheel, watching the shape grow larger in my headlights. But the closer I got, the less it looked like a deer. It was too long in the torso, too narrow at the shoulders. There was no visible fur, no legs splayed awkwardly to the side. It was just a smooth, pale form. Lying almost neatly across the faded centerline, I slowed to a crawl, my headlights washing over it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then it moved. It didn't scramble or roll like an injured animal. It didn't push itself up with its arms. It rose in one slow, deliberate motion, unfolding into something tall and thin, the pale shape resolving into the outline of a person, or at least something close enough to one. I slammed the brake pedal, the tires skidding slightly on the worn asphalt. The figure just stood there in the beam of my headlights, perfectly still. The light caught its face, or where its face should have been, and I saw nothing. No eyes, no mouth, no features at all. Just a flat, blank surface, smooth and pale, reflecting the light in a way that made it seem almost too close, like it was leaning toward the car without actually moving. My first thought was that I had to be seeing it wrong. The light, the shadows, my tired eyes, all of it playing tricks. I gripped the wheel so tightly my hands hurt, waiting for it to step aside or show some kind of intent. But before I could even decide what to do, it was gone. I don't mean it ran off into the dark. I mean it was there one moment and not the next. My headlights spilled onto an empty road, the centerline bare. My breath caught in my throat as I looked around. The only thing I could see was a patch of flattened grass just off the right shoulder, swaying faintly as if something had pressed into it a second ago. Every instinct told me to keep driving, so I did. I eased off the brake and rolled forward, resisting the urge to gun it. The road ahead was empty, but my pulse was pounding in my ears. I glanced in the mirror once, then again, and then I couldn't stop. Every few seconds I checked, expecting to see something pale in the red glow of my taillights. Nothing was there. The darkness behind me stayed unbroken. But the air in the car felt heavier, colder, like I'd left a window cracked, though I hadn't touched the locks. The further I went, the more the woods on either side seemed to close in, their shadows pressing at the edges of my headlights. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself it was just leftover adrenaline making me jittery. I kept my speed steady, my eyes flicking between the road ahead and the mirror. The miles dragged. When I finally saw the faint glow of the highway interchange ahead, I felt some of the tension in my chest loosen, but as I turned onto the ramp, my headlights swept over the grass beside the road, and I saw another flattened patch, same size, same shape as the one back on Route 19. I gripped the wheel harder, refusing to slow down, refusing to give myself a reason to stop and look closer. By the time I made it home, my knuckles were stiff and my shoulders ached from how rigid I'd been. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a moment, engine running, listening to the tick of cooling metal. My porch light flickered faintly in the breeze, casting weak shadows across the yard. That's when I noticed the grass by the edge of the driveway, pressed down, like something long and narrow had been lying there. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up, convinced I'd heard something soft against the siding, or the faint sound of grass bending under weight. The next morning, I went outside, telling myself I was being ridiculous. The flattened spot in the yard was still there. The dew hadn't settled right on it, like the rest of the lawn. I told myself it was probably just from me pulling in too close to the edge, though my tires had been well clear. I haven't driven Route 19 at night since, but every now and then, if I'm on a back road with no traffic and I see something pale ahead, my hands tighten on the wheel. I slow down, I look closer, and in the corner of my vision, I always brace for it, that tall, thin figure rising from the ground, standing impossibly still, waiting. Story 4, mile marker 42. I'd heard people mention mile marker 42 before, always in that half-serious, half-joking way. Small towns pass along the things they'd rather not admit, scare them. The stories varied. Some folks said cars died there without warning. Others said they'd seen someone standing in the tree line, just far enough back that you couldn't make out a face. I never gave it much thought. Roads have quirks. People have overactive imaginations. That night, I wasn't thinking about ghost stories. I was just trying to get home from a late shift, cutting through the back road that runs along the old ridge. It was a cold, dry night, the kind where the stars feel close enough to touch. The only sounds were the steady hum of my tires and the occasional creak from the suspension when I hit a dip in the asphalt. I'd just passed the county's green and white mile 42 post when the check engine light blinked on. It was one of those sharp little jabs of bad luck that make you sigh before you even react. I eased over onto the gravel shoulder, telling myself it was probably nothing more than a loose gas cap. The road was empty in both directions, the darkness stretching out like a tunnel. I killed the engine, stepped out, and popped the hood. The metal clicked faintly in the cool air. I expected to hear the usual background noise, wind shifting through branches, the thin drone of crickets, but there was nothing. The woods on either side of the road were completely still, every sound swallowed up. I leaned over the engine, squinting in the weak glow of the hoodlight. Everything looked normal. No smoke, no smell, no loose belts. That's when I heard it. A knock on the trunk. It wasn't a scrape or a tap from settling metal. It was deliberate. A solid, hollow thunk right above the rear wheel well, the kind of sound knuckles make when they rap against sheet metal. My head shot up, my heart giving one hard kick against my ribs. I stepped back from the hood, glancing toward the back of the car. No one was there. The shoulder gravel stretched empty in both directions, the trees leaning over the ditch like silent spectators. I walked slowly around to the rear, my boots crunching loud in the quiet. The trunk was closed. I reached out and pressed my hand flat against the metal. It was cold and still. The road behind me was nothing but a strip of blacktop vanishing into darkness. My skin prickled as I scanned the tree line. The longer I stared, the more I felt like something could be standing there, blending into the shadows just beyond the reach of my headlights. I told myself it was nothing, just a sound carrying strangely in the stillness. I went back to the driver's seat, slid in, and shut the door. I started the engine. The check engine light was still on, but the idle sounded fine. Then my eyes caught the odometer. It read exactly 42,000 miles. Not a mile more, not a tenth less. I knew I hadn't looked at it earlier. I never did. But the number made me pause. My hands hovered on the steering wheel as a thought crossed my mind. What were the odds of the car hitting that exact number right here, right now? I pulled back onto the road, trying to push the unease down. The woods stayed still as I drove, but the air in the car felt colder, enough that I turned the heat up. I checked the mirrors more than usual, half expecting to see headlights behind me, but the road stayed empty. After a mile or so, I passed another pull-off where an old logging trail met the asphalt. I glanced at it out of habit and thought I saw movement, a shape, tall and narrow, slipping between the trees as if keeping pace with my car. By the time I turned my head for a better look, it was gone. I drove the rest of the way home with my eyes flicking constantly between the road and the mirrors. The odometer stayed on that perfect 42,000 until I pulled into my driveway, as if the car refused to tick over until I'd stopped. When I turned the ignition off, the dashboard went black, leaving me in the kind of silence that made my ears ring. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps on gravel. Every distant sound like a knock somewhere just out of sight. In the morning, I went out to check the car. The odometer had moved on, 42,000.3 miles, but there was something on the trunk I hadn't noticed before. Low on the passenger side, near the wheel well, was a faint smudge. It wasn't dirt from the road. It looked like the print of 4 fingers dragged slightly downward, as if someone had rested their hand there. I washed it off, telling myself it had to be grease or tree sap from work. Though I couldn't think of how it would have gotten there, still, I took a different route to work that day, and every day since. I've heard other people in town mention the mile marker again, usually in that same half-joking tone, but I catch something different in their eyes when they talk about it, like they've stopped there too, even if they won't say it out loud. I've never told anyone what happened. I don't want to hear their stories. I don't want to know if they've also heard the knock, or seen something in the trees, or looked down to find a number staring back at them that they can't explain. Because if they have, it means it wasn't just me. And if it wasn't just me, then maybe there's something waiting at mile marker 42, watching every car that slows down there. And maybe, just maybe, it's counting. Story 5, The Hitchhiker in the Rain. The rain had been coming down in sheets since sundown, the kind of cold, soaking rain that makes the whole road shine like black glass. My wipers were already on their fastest setting, but they could barely keep up, the water smearing across the windshield in a constant hissing sheet. My headlights didn't do much but catch the glint of the wet pavement ahead, the light bouncing back so bright it hurt my eyes. I'd been driving for hours, trying to make it home before the storm got worse. But out on that back stretch of road, there was no telling how long it would be before I saw another set of headlights. The trees pressed in from both sides, their bare winter branches hanging low, swaying just enough to make me feel like I wasn't the only thing moving through the dark. I almost didn't notice him at first. He was just a tall shape under the single working streetlight in that stretch, the rain streaming down his coat in silver lines. His collar was turned up against the wind, and his head was bowed like he was trying to disappear into it, but one arm was stretched out, thumb pointed toward the road in that unmistakable hitchhiker's gesture. I don't usually stop for anyone, especially not at night, and especially not in weather like this, but something about him stuck in my head as I passed. How still he was, how the rain didn't seem to bother him. I told myself to keep going, and I did. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, my breath caught. The back passenger door was open just slightly, the interior light a faint, dull glow in the wet dark. It wasn't wide, just a few inches, but it was enough to make my heart slam against my ribs. I hit the lock button automatically, my eyes flicking between the road ahead and that sliver of light in the mirror. The rain made everything harder to see, but there was no movement back there. At least, none I could make out. I drove another mile before I finally pulled over. My hands felt clammy on the steering wheel, and I could hear the rain pounding on the roof like 1,000 fingers drumming at once. I sat there for a long moment, engine running, trying to convince myself it was just the latch slipping or maybe the wind catching the seal. But the thought of the door opening on its own didn't feel much better than the alternative. I stepped out into the cold, the rain soaking through my jacket in seconds. The gravel shoulder squished under my boots, water pooling around the edges. I opened the back door all the way and froze. The seat was wet, not damp from the weather, but soaked through, as if someone had been sitting there dripping for a long time. My fingers brushed against the upholstery and came away slick and cold. The air inside the car held a faint, unmistakable scent, tobacco smoke, stale but clinging, like it had been trapped there for years. I leaned into the back seat, half expecting to see muddy footprints on the floor mat. But it was clean, no sign of anyone. I shut the door hard, the sound muffled by the rain, and climbed back into the driver's seat. My pulse was still high, but the longer I sat there, the more the silence inside the car pressed in. The smell seemed stronger now, winding its way into the front, making the back of my throat itch. I rolled the window down a crack, but all that did was let the wet air in. I pulled back onto the road, telling myself not to look in the mirror again. But it was impossible not to. Every few seconds my eyes flicked up, expecting to see something sitting there, head bent, dripping water onto the seat. The interior light had gone off when I shut the door, and the darkness behind me felt thicker than it should. The rain kept falling, harder now, the wind shoving at the car in short, sharp bursts. The road wound through a low stretch where the ditches on either side were nearly full, water rushing along in dark ribbons. As I came around a bend, my headlights caught another pool of light in the distance, a street light just like the one I'd passed earlier. Under it stood another figure. My grip tightened on the wheel. This one was shorter, wearing what looked like a faded jacket, but the posture was the same, still head down, one arm out with a thumb raised. I slowed without meaning to, the tires hissing over the wet pavement. For a second, I could have sworn his head lifted just enough for me to see the pale edge of his face, though the rain distorted everything. I kept moving, forcing myself not to stop, but the unease in my chest twisted tighter. When I looked in the mirror again, the back door was cracked open just as before. No light this time, just the thin line of black where it didn't meet the frame. My skin went cold all over. I didn't pull over this time. I couldn't. I just drove, faster than before, my eyes fixed on the center line, pretending I couldn't hear the faint sound of water dripping somewhere behind me. The smell of tobacco was stronger now, almost overwhelming, like someone had lit a cigarette and let it burn down without ever taking a drag. My throat burned with it. I rolled the window down wider, rain splashing against my arm, the cold biting into my skin. But the air didn't clear. I reached the turn for my road and took it too quickly, the back tires sliding for a moment before catching. My driveway came into view, dark and slick, the porch light glowing faintly through the curtain of rain. I pulled in fast, cutting the engine but leaving the headlights on. I turned in my seat to the back, my breath held tight in my chest. The door was shut, the seat was still wet, and in the middle of it, resting like it had been placed there with care, was a cigarette. Unlit, its paper stained a little from the damp, the filter pointing toward me. I didn't touch it. I got out, locking the doors as I went, and hurried inside. From the living room window, I could see my car sitting there in the rain, its headlights washing pale light across the yard. The wet seat seemed to darken even more as the minutes passed, the fabric sagging slightly under the weight of water that wasn't dripping from anywhere I could see. I closed the curtains and tried not to think about it. In the morning, the seat was dry. The cigarette was gone. But the smell of tobacco was still there. Faint but persistent, like it had seeped into the air itself. I drove with the windows down for days, but it never completely left. And every time it rains now, even if I'm not on that road, I find myself glancing at the back seat just to make sure the door is closed. Story 6. Static on Channel 6. I've had that car for years, and the radio hasn't worked for almost as long. Every station is just static, sometimes a faint hum, sometimes a sharp, scratchy hiss, but never music, never voices. I'd gotten used to the silence on my drives, just the sound of the tires and the wind seeping in through the old door seals. That night, I was heading home late from a delivery job, taking the back road through Bent Creek to shave off a few miles. It was the kind of cold where the frost on the shoulders looked like a thin layer of ash under the moonlight. The road was empty, except for me, the trees crowding in on both sides like dark walls. Somewhere past the old wooden bridge outside Bent Creek, I reached over to adjust the heater, and the radio crackled to life. It wasn't music, not at first, just the usual static, but softer, almost smoothed out. Then, through the hiss, I heard it. A voice, low, calm, and slow, like it had nowhere to be. It said my first name, not once, not twice, but over and over each time exactly the same. The sound wasn't tinny like an old recording. It felt close, like someone was speaking from just inside the dash. My fingers froze on the heater dial. I don't know why I didn't just kill the ignition right then, but instead I reached over and turned the radio off. The voice kept speaking, my name threading through the quiet, only now the static behind it had deepened, like wind rushing through a long tunnel. I tried to tell myself it was a bleed-over from a nearby station, some weird fluke of the old wiring, but the further I drove, the clearer it got. There was no shift in tone, no hint of breath, just my name, calm and even, as though the person speaking knew I wouldn't answer and didn't care. My grip tightened on the wheel, knuckles stiff, eyes fixed, dead ahead. The road began to feel different, like the curves were stretching out longer than they should, the familiar markers, an old rusted sign, a narrow culvert, showing up in the wrong places. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the voice stopped. The static swelled for a moment, then thinned back into the faint hiss I'd known for years. I felt the tension drain from my shoulders, but it didn't leave relief behind, just a kind of empty ringing in my ears. I drove the rest of the way home without touching the radio, my pulse slow but heavy. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a moment, staring at the frost glinting under the porch light. That's when I looked at my watch. The drive from Bent Creek to my house takes 30 minutes. 40 if you're crawling. I'd left the bridge just after 11, but the watch said it was nearly 2 in the morning. The dash clock, dim and stubbornly inaccurate for years, showed the same time. My phone, which I'd left plugged in on the passenger seat, was dead. Not low, completely dead, as if the battery had been drained in an instant. Inside the house, the quiet felt heavy, the kind where every creak of the floor seems a little too loud. I plugged in the phone and set my watch on the counter, telling myself it was just me losing track of time, though the part of me that's always counting miles and minutes knew better. I couldn't shake the sound of my name being spoken, how it didn't sound curious or warning or even human. It was like it was simply marking the fact that I was there. The next morning, I went out to the car. The frost had melted, leaving beads of water across the hood. But the windshield was clean except for one long smear across the driver's side, as though a wet sleeve had dragged across it. I tried the radio, half expecting it to work normally, but it was back to its old self. Nothing but static, broken up now and then by faint pops of dead air. I scanned through every station, stopping at the one that had come alive the night before. Channel 6, it was empty. I told myself it had to be a freak mix of conditions, cold air, bad wiring, the right place on the road. But I didn't take Bent Creek again for weeks. When I finally did, in the middle of the afternoon, the sun cutting sharp angles through the trees, I kept my hand off the radio entirely. The drive went normally, the bridges and mile markers where they should be, the time matching the distance. It should have made me feel better, but instead it left me wondering if whatever happened only came looking in the dark. A few nights later, I was parked outside a friend's place, engine off, waiting for him to come out. The keys were still in the ignition and the radio was off. Out of nowhere, the dash gave a single, short buzz, the exact tone it makes when you switch stations. My eyes went to the display, and for just a second the number 6 glowed there, faint and green, before fading back to black. The heater wasn't running, but I swore I felt a thin thread of cold air spill from the vents, brushing against my hands. I left before my friend even made it outside. The drive home felt longer than it should have, but the clock matched the time when I pulled in. I haven't touched the radio since, but sometimes when I'm driving at night on a quiet road, I think I hear something under the hum of the tires. Not words, not yet, just the shape of a voice, the kind that could be waiting to say my name again when it knows I'm listening. Story 7, the car that passed twice. I was driving home late on Highway 84, the kind of late where the road feels like it belongs to you alone, nothing but your headlights and the faded paint of the center line keeping you steady. It was cool out, just past the turn of the season, and the air slipping in through the crack in my window smelled faintly of damp leaves. The drive should have been easy, about an hour of rolling curves and long straights before I hit town, but the quiet had a weight to it that night. The kind that makes you feel like you're being watched from the tree line. I'd been behind a pair of dim tail lights for a while, a faded old blue sedan going at least 10 under the limit. Its paint was dulled by time, the rear bumper bent slightly inward, and the right tail light had a cracked cover that let the bulb's light bleed out in a dull, uneven glow. I eased around it on a long, straight stretch, catching a brief glimpse of the driver, a pale face, eyes forward. Hands still at 10 and 2 like they'd been there for hours. The road opened up ahead, empty again, and I settled back into my pace. 10 minutes later, a faint glow began to swell in my mirror. I figured it was someone else coming up behind me, maybe a locale who knew the road better than I did. But as the car drew closer, I felt my stomach tighten. It was the same old blue sedan, same faded paint, same bent bumper, same cracked taillight. It came up steady, then slid past me without hesitation, the driver's face just barely visible in the wash of my headlights. This time I could tell his head was angled slightly toward me as he passed, though his eyes never quite met mine. I tried to shrug it off. People take odd routes out here, and maybe he'd stop somewhere while I kept moving, but a part of me was already counting the minutes until I saw it again. Sure enough, a few miles later, there it was, pulled over on the shoulder up ahead, angled just enough toward the road that I could see the driver through the windshield as I approached. He was sitting perfectly still, both hands on the wheel, watching me. His face was in shadow. but I could make out the pale line of his cheek and the faint glint of his eyes. I kept my own eyes forward, not slowing, not giving him the satisfaction of knowing I'd noticed. When the car appeared behind me again, it was like the air in the cab got colder. The heater was still running, but I felt the kind of chill that starts in your bones. It passed me faster this time, the hum of its engine low and constant, and for just a second, I thought I saw his lips move like he was speaking to himself. The third time I saw it parked, I almost laughed. But it wasn't the kind of laugh that made you feel better. It was the kind you let out when something is too strange to process, when you're trying to convince yourself it's nothing. This time, the sedan's driver's side window was down, and the man's arm was resting on the edge, his hand hanging loose. The fingers twitched once, just enough to be noticeable, and I couldn't tell if it was a wave or something else. I didn't look back. By the fourth time it came up behind me, my nerves were frayed. I had the sensation you get when you've been in the woods too long without hearing a bird or an insect, like the world has gone still for a reason you're not meant to understand. I scanned the road ahead for a turn-off. The next one came up quickly, just a narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt leading off into the trees. I didn't know where it went, but I took it without thinking, my tires slipping slightly on the wet edge of the turn. The road was smaller, swallowed up by the forest almost immediately, the canopy above blotting out what little light the moon offered. I checked the mirror, expecting to see the sedan's headlights swinging in behind me, but the road stayed empty. My breathing slowed, though my grip on the wheel stayed tight. The trees pressed in closer, the shadows between them so thick it felt like anything could be standing there, just out of sight. After a mile or so, I realized I hadn't seen any signs. No mile markers, no driveways, nothing to indicate where I was. The asphalt was breaking up into gravel now, the crunch under my tires sounding too loud in the quiet. I thought about turning around, but the idea of passing back through that stretch of Highway 84, with the sedan waiting somewhere in the dark, kept me moving forward. Then I saw it again. The blue sedan was parked on the side of this road now, half hidden in the trees. No headlights, no engine running, but I knew it instantly. The faded paint, the dented bumper, the cracked taillight catching a glint from my own lights as I approached. The driver was inside, his face turned fully toward me this time. The pale skin looked almost grey in my beams, and his eyes reflected the light like glass. I passed without slowing, every nerve in my body screaming to keep going, but I couldn't stop myself from glancing in the mirror. The car was gone. I drove faster after that, the gravel spitting under my tires. The road wound on and on, each bend revealing more darkness, no sign of an end. My headlights picked out old wooden fence posts, long since rotted, and a narrow footbridge over a ditch that looked more like a scar in the earth than a waterway. I was starting to think I'd taken a wrong turn into some forgotten stretch of nowhere when the trees thinned, and I saw the faint glow of a porch light ahead. I pulled into the dirt clearing in front of the house, engine still running. The place was small, leaning a little to one side, the siding weathered to a dull grey. I couldn't see anyone through the windows. I thought about knocking, asking for directions, but something about the stillness of the place stopped me. It was the same kind of stillness I'd felt on the highway before the sedan appeared, too complete, too deliberate. I backed out slowly, keeping my eyes on the house until it disappeared behind the trees. The road seemed narrower now, the shadows heavier. I drove until I found a wider shoulder where I could turn around, then headed back the way I'd come. When I reached Highway 84 again, the relief was short-lived. Half a mile ahead, under the weak light of a broken street lamp, the blue sedan sat parked on the shoulder. This time it was facing me. The driver's door was open, and the man stood beside it, his shape silhouetted against the glint of metal. His head was tilted slightly, like he was studying me from a distance. I didn't slow down. I didn't look away either, not until the car and the man were swallowed by the dark behind me. When I finally pulled into my driveway that night, I shut the car off and sat in silence, waiting for my pulse to steady. In the morning, there was a streak of gravel dust along the side of my car, low to the ground, the kind that comes from another vehicle pulling in too close. I told myself it could have happened anywhere. But sometimes, when I'm driving that stretch of 84 late at night, I catch a pair of dim headlights in the mirror. I never wait long enough to see if it's the same car. Story 8, The Woman at the Crossroads. It was getting late, later than I meant for it to be, when I found myself headed toward the county line. I'd taken a wrong turn an hour back, thinking I could cut through the hills and shave time off the drive. Instead, I'd wound myself into a maze of back roads that all seemed to bend toward the same strip of dark woods. The sun had been gone for a while, leaving only a kind of dull, bluish light in the sky, the kind that makes everything look still, like a photograph. My phone had no signal, the GPS stuck on the last place it knew. So I'd gone back to an old folded map I kept in the glove box. Somewhere along the way, I rolled up to a 4-way crossroads and decided to stop. The locals talk about that place in the way small towns talk about anything they can't quite explain. A woman was hit there in the 1950s. No one ever said much more. No details about who she was, what she was doing out there, or why she's supposed to linger. I'd never put much stock in that kind of talk. I was only thinking about how to get myself pointed in the right direction. The crossroads was quiet, the blacktop damp from a storm that hadn't quite arrived, and the woods in every direction stood thick, their edges dark as ink. I left the engine running, a map unfolded across my lap, leaning forward to catch what little light the dash gave. That's when I saw her. She was standing on the far side of the road, directly across from my car. A faded Sunday dress hung from her shoulders, the kind with small flowers you only notice when you get close. Her hands were clasped in front of her, fingers intertwined so tightly they looked almost knotted. Her hair was pinned back in a style I'd only ever seen in old photographs. She wasn't moving, wasn't fidgeting, just staring straight at the car. Something in my chest tightened. I told myself it was just a passerby, maybe someone from a nearby house, though there weren't any houses for miles. I blinked, just a normal blink, and she was gone. The space where she'd been was empty, but the road there was wet, darker than the rest. I looked closer and realized it wasn't just dark, it was patterned. A trail of wet footprints led from the spot where she'd stood toward the tree line. They were bare feet, each step pressed deep enough to leave the outline of toes. The rain hadn't started yet. I don't know what made me do it, but I put the car in park and stepped out. The air had that heavy feeling that comes before a storm, but there wasn't a drop falling. My shoes crunched on the damp gravel at the road's edge, and I followed the prints with my eyes. They were fresh enough that the edges hadn't blurred. They cut straight toward the woods, ending just where the ditch rose into the undergrowth. I stood there for a moment, listening. No wind, no birds, no hum of insects. The stillness was so complete, it made the hair at the back of my neck lift. I thought I heard something deep in the trees, a faint shifting sound, like fabric brushing against bark, but it was too soft to be sure. I backed up toward the car, my eyes still on the tree line. The air seemed thicker now, harder to breathe, and I felt the kind of pressure you get when someone is standing close behind you. When I got into the driver's seat, I locked the doors out of instinct. I was about to put the car in gear when something flickered in the side mirror. On the road behind me, at the far edge of the intersection, a figure stood in the center line. Same faded dress, Same clasped hands, but her head was tilted now, just enough to make it clear she was watching me. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on the mirror and shifted into drive. The moment I started forward, the figure was gone again. I drove for miles after that without seeing another car or house. The rain finally came, hard and cold, hammering the roof like 1,000 fingertips. The wipers struggled to keep the windshield clear, and every time they swept aside the water, I half expected to see her standing at the edge of the road. When I reached my driveway, the rain eased into a mist. I sat there for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. My shoes were damp from where I'd stepped out at the crossroads, and the floor mat was wet beneath them. I reached down to straighten it, and my fingers brushed something slick and cold. In the dim porch light, I could see them clearly. 3 small, perfect wet footprints on the mat, pressed into the fabric as if someone had stepped there with bare feet. I never unfolded that map again, and I don't take the county line road at night, not even when it's the fastest way home, because I have the feeling that if I ever stop there again, she won't stay on the other side of the road. Story 9. Lights in the Hollow. Miller Hollow wasn't my usual way home, but that night I was tired enough to want the quickest route I could find. The main road was shut down for repairs, and my phone's map kept rerouting me back to it, so I cut through the hollow instead. I'd only been down that way once before, years ago, in the daylight, and I remembered little more than narrow lanes, sagging fence lines, and woods that never seemed to end. The pavement gave way to patched asphalt after the first mile, the kind that made your tires hum in a different tone. And the hills closed in around me until the sky was little more than a strip of dark between the ridges. It was deep in the valley when I first saw them, pinpricks of warm, moving light up on the ridge to my right. At first I thought they were porch lamps from houses tucked back in the trees, but they moved in a way that didn't make sense for something fixed. I slowed down, leaning toward the passenger window for a better look. The lights bobbed gently at first, as though someone was walking with lanterns weaving between the tree trunks. Then they began to move faster, not steadily, not in one direction, but darting from side to side, zigzagging between the trees like they were chasing something. I rolled the window down a few inches. The air that came in was damp and heavy, carrying that thick smell of moss and leaf rot you only get in low valleys. There was no sound, not the crunch of boots on leaves, not the call of voices, nothing but the hum of my idling engine. The lights kept moving, and the longer I watched, the more wrong their motion seemed. No person could move like that. Not over that kind of terrain, not without stumbling. They'd race ahead in a blur, stop dead, then change direction without any arc or sway, like they were being pulled on strings. The road curved, bringing me lower into the hollow, and for a moment the ridgeline disappeared from view. When it came back into sight, the lights had shifted closer, though I hadn't seen them make the journey down. My stomach knotted as I realized they were no longer weaving among the trees at random. They were following the shape of the road. I pressed the gas a little harder. My headlights swept across the narrow lane, catching the rough edges of the ditch to my left and the rise of the slope on my right. The lights above kept pace, always just far enough back to be hidden by branches, but close enough for their glow to slip between the gaps. Then my headlights flickered. It wasn't the quick dip you get when a battery's on its way out. It was a full, deliberate dimming, like someone had dialed them down. The beams sputtered once, twice, then died completely, leaving me in the kind of black that feels solid. I hit the brakes and gripped the wheel, my heart thudding so hard I felt it in my throat. The only light left came from the ridge, and in that instant, every single one of those moving glows stopped. When the headlights surged back on, the lights were no longer up on the ridge. They were at the edge of the road, not one or two, but a cluster of them bobbing slowly, as if swaying on unseen handles. They were so close I could see the halo of their glow reflecting off the wet bark of the trees. The road ahead narrowed, the ditch on one side and the slope on the other, giving me nowhere to turn but forward. My hands tightened on the wheel until my knuckles ached, and I floored it. The car lunged ahead, engine roaring louder than I'd ever heard it, the beam of the headlights bouncing with every bump in the pavement. For a few seconds, the lights at the roadside kept pace, slipping between trees like water through cracks. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they vanished into the dark. I didn't ease up on the gas until I saw the faint glow of the main highway ahead. The moment I hit that stretch of open road, I pulled over and sat there, shaking, the engine idling rough. My hands were slick on the wheel, and the damp smell from the hollow clung to my clothes. I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting to see a faint, bobbing glow appear in the distance, but the road behind me stayed black. I've never driven Miller Hollow since, and when I pass the turnoff, even in broad daylight, I keep my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I know that if I looked up toward that ridge, I'd see something waiting in the trees, something that can move faster than it should and knows exactly how to find the road again.